An about-face from the FBI as it now admits the Jewish community was in fact targeted in the Texas synagogue standoff over the weekend. But the Bureau's initial reaction is leading some to question its entire mission. As one conservative radio host wondered if the FBI is now solely focused on destroying the domestic enemies of the Democratic Party. I'm Emily Campagno, and this is Outnumbered. I'm joined by my co-hosts Kayleigh McEnany and Harris Faulkner, former State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus, and in the center seat, entrepreneur and author of Woke Inc., Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, a gunman burst into a synagogue during Shabbat services and took the rabbi and 3 other parishioners hostage, all while demanding the release of a convicted terrorist with a history of blatant anti-Semitism. 11 very tense hours later, all the hostages made it out unharmed. But here's how the FBI initially described the incident.
We do believe from our engagement with this subject that he was singularly focused on one issue, and it was not specifically related to the Jewish community, but we're continuing to work to find motive.
The FBI was then roundly criticized for downplaying anti-Semitism as the motive. Then hours later, it reversed course, saying, "This is a terrorism-related matter in which the Jewish community was targeted, and it's being investigated by the Joint Terrorism Task Force." But the president still only highlighted the terror angle of attack.
This was an act of terror. This was an act of terror. The Attorney General was focused on making sure that we deal with these kinds of acts. And thank God, we have such a professional FBI.
Morgan, as the Jerusalem Post pointed out, the idea that any attack on a synagogue is not specifically related to the Jewish community is patently absurd. And they asked, what more has to happen? What does it take for that to be viewed as specifically related to the Jewish community, Morgan?
Yeah, the statements that first came out after we all learned about this hostage situation, and then thank God, right, that it was cleared up and that people on the ground did their job. But the statements were just incredibly tone deaf, especially at a time when we have rising anti-Semitism around the world, but in our own country as well. In fact, you know, I think many people know that my family and I are Jewish, and when we go to temple on Saturdays here in Nashville, there's always these amazing cops standing at the front, and I thank them. And, you know, I'm relieved to have them. And I know plenty of churches around the country need to have protection as well, sadly, because of attacks. And I think it's just a devastating place that we are in our country, that we have to have police at our centers of worship in order to protect us. But what is more important is that the administration not look for political correctness in these situations. There was a terrorist who came over and targeted a synagogue in order to achieve his political ends. That's the definition of terrorism. And at a time, as I said, when it is rising around this country, we should not be worried about, I don't even know if it was political correct. I don't know what this administration was worried about, what they were trying to cover for. But at this day and age, with it rising around the country, we just need to call terrorism for exactly what it is and then deal with this situation.
And Kayleigh, to Morgan's point, you know, we might not understand what the motive, the intent behind this administration's refusal to label this what it was, but we know exactly what's been taking their attention, right? Critics argue, look, this entire administration has been focused solely on labeling Trump supporters domestic enemies and white supremacists when they should be focusing on actual extremist terrorists like this one, Kayleigh.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, what an incredible statement from the FBI to say, quote, this is not specifically related to the Jewish community. That's a declarative statement. And in the immediate aftermath, to make that kind of declarative statement is really shocking. Also, from the White House at 6 p.m., we get a statement from the White House referring to the hostage situation. No mention of a synagogue, no mention of a rabbi being held up. And look, I understand and appreciate being careful as facts are unfolding in a situation. That's totally fair. But at 6 p.m., when apparently this whole standoff began at around 10:40 a.m., so this is nearly 7 hours later, and there's no thought of putting in there the word synagogue or rabbi or any detail, is really pretty shocking, and I think kind of dovetails in with that FBI statement. And when you contrast that, Emily, to your point exactly, Miranda did Devine did a great column on this in the New York Post. When you contrast that with how quick Democrats are to label their political opponents domestic enemies, Nancy Pelosi in August of 2020 called GOP lawmakers and Trump, quote, enemies of the state. When you look at Kyle Rittenhouse, how when President Biden was a candidate, Kyle Rittenhouse's face was put in there as they're talking about white supremacy before the trial even began. And then just this week, President Biden referring to those who oppose federalizing elections, a federal takeover election, segregationists. Think how quick they are to use this terminology with their political opponents, and how loth it seemed. It took many hours to have any sort of strong words about terrorism from the White House.
Right. Vivek, the criticism here is that we're seeing FBI leadership, for some reason, focusing on simply the enemies of the Democratic Party rather than the enemies of the United States.
Look, the FBI has come out and decided that white nationalism is the #1 threat they need to focus on. The problem is that the facts don't fit that narrative. Remember, actually, in Waukesha, not very long ago, over near Christmas, there was a black man who had posted a lot of anti-white content, racially hateful content, that used an SUV to kill 6 people and injure nearly 60 in a Christmas parade. You don't even hear about that anymore. You even want to talk about the Capitol. Actually, to my knowledge, the only U.S. Capitol police officer that was killed by an act of terrorism at the Capitol was killed not on January 6th at the Capitol, but was actually killed in April of last year by Noah Green, a committed follower of the Nation of Islam. And again, you don't hear about that anymore. But I think that all of this is just a symptom of a deeper cancer. I don't even focus foremost on the Biden administration. I focus on the organization of the FBI. This is an organization that has persisted as I believe, a cancerous rot under both Democrat and Republican presidents. Keep in mind, actually, President Trump wasn't able to tame this organization either. They didn't even actually vet many of his nominees. Kaylee knows what I'm talking about, on time. I think that I'm definitely not in support of defunding the local police. But I could get behind defunding the FBI. I think that this is an organization that epitomizes what the deep state is all about. They decide what political agenda they're going to press. It's irrespective of the politics of who's in the White House, and it actually threatens and undermines the security of our country and the trust in the people who are charged with the security of our country rather than actually protecting it, which is what they're there to do. So I think that's why it's so important to call out, and I think it actually needs to be at the top of the agenda for the person who runs for president next from the Republican Party. Personally, I think the Democratic Party should be concerned about it, too. But this is a top issue about the FBI. That's what we need to see in this.
Emily, I want to just jump on that for 1 second, if you'll allow me to.
Yeah, of course. But really quickly, just to underscore the chasm between the rank-and-file FBI agents with leadership making these decisions versus those that are carrying out their orders, putting their lives on the line and protecting, to Morgan's point, worshipers and Americans throughout the whole country. Please, Harris, go ahead.
Well, Vivek, one thing that I would say, and I would add to that list of where the FBI has then been inserted by the DOJ and maybe via the White House and that National School Board Association, is the movement against dissenting parents and the conversations that they want to have that might be difficult conversations at school board meetings. I mean, when you mix all of that up together, do we need to take a look at how the FBI performs its duties in America and its real role? I don't think that what you're saying is anything more than an investigation into the Federal Bureau of Investigation and how it actually investigates. But Emily, in terms of what you're saying, the rank and file, versus those at a higher, more federal level. Look, we're always closest to the people who are closest to us, right? So in your community, you're going to know your local cops, and I suggest in this crime environment in New York City, I live across the river in Jersey, and crime is everywhere in urban areas, certainly. We have Newark. But here in New York City, get to know your cops because they stand watch. They stand on the wall when others don't volunteer to do that in an environment where hate is hurled at them. It's a different relationship that we would have with police officers around us. And I would hope that people would have to, the intestinal fortitude and the smarts to go out and do that, no matter what their politics are. But this whole idea about where the FBI lives in our lives, Kaylee, you were part of the administration that took a look at how that worked out. Is it worth looking deeper? Or is that just so offensive to liberals that they may never do it?
No, it is worth looking into, Harris. I mean, you think about the attack on Fort Hood and the way the FBI came out and called it workplace violence. There is this really questionable reaction from the FBI to some of these terrorist attacks that we see. And when you couple that with the way former candidate and then President Donald Trump was treated on the Russia issue, I think it raised a whole host of questions why this narrative was peddled for a very long time, and the president being briefed on it before he took office, and that, they called it an offensive intelligence brief. I forget the exact term, but the way it was kind of used to play into the narrative. Sure, it needs to be looked at. We continue to see these red flags. We got to ask questions.
Vivek, that's actually perfect, Kaylee, that you brought that up, because that was my last question I was reserving for you, Vivek, is that, contrast this situation or compare this current situation with indeed the 2009 Fort Hood terror attack that was used and twisted and called into a workplace violence argument that really rocked this, turned it into a debacle, turned it into a scandal. And frankly, people have never forgiven the Obama administration for twisting it as such. Is this that next version?
Look, I think that this is just an evidence of actually who is pulling the strings here in actually driving the narrative. And I may be a little bit, more of a hard line position on this than all of you, but I believe that actually there needs to be a conversation about shutting down the FBI and replacing it with something else altogether. Because when you have an organization whose roots run that deep, it is not going to be changed through incremental reform. I do think we need more transparency. I do think we need more accountability. I'm no conspiracy theorist, but I think it is shameful that we still don't have clear answers from the federal government and the FBI as to how many FBI agents were present at the Capitol on January 6th. The public needs to have its trust restored. That requires transparency, but that may require even more drastic measures taken by the right person in the White House to say that actually, sometimes when an institution has outlived its purpose, we need to create a new one to take its place. I think we're at that moment to have that conversation about the FBI today, out in the open and unafraid of the consequence.
I wonder what would take its place, though, because that's where the defund the police talk first started. And the ideas were that we'd put, community, activists in there and social workers. Not that there's not room for some extra voices, but I wonder what that would look like. And
look, I think it's a really different conversation locally.
Really consider what we need to do in that realm. I mean, what you're saying is hard stuff, Vivek. And are we ready to take those steps? You ask a lot of great questions.
Yeah, and
let's have the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I think so many questions that Americans have for that FBI leadership is in part because these are the topics that eclipse the amazing work that the FBI agents do on a daily basis. For example, in the realm of sex trafficking, of child kidnapping and trafficking, agents like Eddie Fryer that have made history and done so much good globally, truly, from their work with the FBI. But situations like this, it just sort of takes over, and it unfortunately dilutes the faith the American public has in the leadership at the top.